Hey guys, Doc Ryan here. Had a question this week. Somebody asked me why am I always kind of going through Greek or Hebrew? Why don't I refer more to the Aramaic? And it's really a good question. And if you lived in Jesus' time and were Jewish, you likely were brought up, especially if you came from any kind of a spiritual family at all, you were probably well versed in Hebrew. In fact, you probably had lots of the scripture memorized in Hebrew because they considered that to be the language given by God, their native tongue. The problem is that had been lost over generations. And so most of what the Jewish people were speaking at that time in day-to-day language wasn't really Hebrew, it was Aramaic. And most of you guys know that. And when you look at the Aramaic portion of it, people often say could the Bible have been written in Aramaic if that might have been Jesus' speaking tongue? Well, some people believe that, and our early texts tend to be about 4th century, and the 4th century versions that we have are Greek. Now, there is a pretty early Aramaic version of it that's 5th century, a little bit later, but when you really get into the linguistics, and that's really not what this video is about, there's a lot of that on the internet if you want to, but when you really get into it, it appears that it was probably written in Greek and then translated to Aramaic and not the other way around. And so, does it really matter? It doesn't necessarily matter to me and most people reading that, but the important thing to know is that very little of what we have in terms of our English translation, and when you look at it from Greek to English, very little of the Bible is actually written in Aramaic. Sometimes it's kind of quoted that way, but there's less than 15 examples of, Aramaic in the New Testament Bible where that's translated. Now, as you can imagine, this gets a little bit messy around Jesus' time because they were wanting to speak in God's language, which most considered, again, to be Hebrew, but then the people around them sometimes really only understood Aramaic, but then the learned culture, the wider world, was all speaking and writing in Greek. And so we see a lot of that kind of come through as well. So where am I going with this? The question is really, what should we refer to as Jesus and God? What is the correct way to refer to them? Some people have picked up on my videos that some of these words that we've used in the past, like Elohim and things like that, they're not really the best way to refer to God. And most of us know that our God has many, many names. And so the question is, what is the best? Well, I think the best name is Yahweh. That is his name, God. And then when you look at Jesus, Yeshua is a great name. Now, I'm not one that has any problems with using other names, especially when we're amongst people that know who we're referring to. But when it kind of gets to a broader sense and people aren't really sure, those are the two names that I like to go with. So what does this mean? Well, I know a lot of people that say you should call Jesus and God by these names because those are the names that the Bible gives us as their names. And so when you look at me and you say, what should I call you? Well, most of my friends just call me Ryan. Some people in different circles call me Doc Ryan. Some people call me Mr. Ryan. There's all kinds of stuff. And then I have some other slang names besides that too. And when I'm in those circles, people know who they're talking about. But if I'm signing a legal document, then I'm actually signing it very different than all of those things. So you kind of have to read a little bit through the Bible of the people that were amongst Jesus and talking with God when those words are being used. But I also think that, those names are very sovereign. Those are the chosen names, and they're of reverence, they're of holiness. And, when I get serious with people, that's an idea of what we should be using. So when I sign a legal document again, I need to use my whole name. But do I use my whole name all the time? I actually use my whole name very, very rarely. So looking at the Bible, you just have to kind of sift through what the naming means. And, there's a lot of little names throughout the Bible that, sometimes really don't mean much of anything. They might be different dialects or the people there needed to differentiate between which one is which one, like on the cross. Do you give us Jesus or do you give us Jesus? Do you know what I'm talking about? The first name of Barabbas. And so they needed to kind of qualify some things onto that just so you would know who you're talking about. Those aren't places in the Bible where, they're necessarily saying we need to talk this way. So actually where I'm going with this is that I want you to meet a very good friend of mine. His name is Steve Castle, and he is Steve Castle Ministries. And I met Steve years ago, and I'll remember when I met him because I used a name for God. Now, this is the first time I ever met him, and I used one of the names for God, and he whispers in my ear, "Hey, we should talk about this sometime." And it just kind of caught me off, and I didn't know him from anybody else, and he didn't know that I was really into all this stuff. And so, as it led, it opened up this great conversation to the names of God and how we use those names in proper and improper ways, and awe and respect and holiness, yet having a relationship with someone that is so close and intimate to us. And so that's how I met Steve Castle. So whenever I think of the names of God, that's what I think about is discussing this with my good friend Steve. And I've known him for a long time, and we've done a lot of 3-day weekends together. And I just can't think of a better guy to be in the ministry with. And I want you to consider having Steve Castle come to your church, to your ministry, to speak. He's a specialist in many areas of the Bible. He's an emphatic teacher, preacher, man of the Lord, Spirit-driven brother, and some of my best moments of ministry have been alongside Steve. So today I just wanted, if you've never heard of Steve or his ministry or don't know, and maybe you're praying about somebody to have to your church, to work with couples, to have a retreat, to whatever it might be, I want you to consider Steve and his ministry, because I think you're going to find that he's one of the most dynamic people that I know in my life, and he's blessed me over and over and through. So thank you today for this little study on names, and I pray that God will bless you and keep you as you go your way.